Welcome to episode 525 of the Autoblog Podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. Joining me today in studio, Associate Editor Joel Stocksdale. How's it going, Joel?
Good.
This is a really big podcast. We got a lot going on this week. First week of September, the kids are back in school. It's good to be fully back here. It's actually even a little chilly here in Michigan, so It feels like fall. Fall means lots of new cars. If you've been following along with us this week, the biggest event by far has been the reveal of the 2018 Nissan Leaf. It's a better looking car, lots of new features, a little more tech savvy, more range, so it's more powerful. This is basically all the things that people were criticizing the Leaf before previously. It seems like Nissan has addressed these. I watched the reveal. You've seen a lot of this car. What is your initial impressions?
Well, I love the way it looks. It is a colossal improvement over the previous model.
Absolutely.
It's low. I mean, physically it is lower, wider, and longer, but it looks that way too. I think a big part of that is from like the more horizontally oriented lights and the contrasting roof that you can get. It all makes it look a little bit lower and more hunkered down.
Yeah, good looking car. It's more sophisticated, I think. They wanted it to look a little bit less like sort of that science experiment thing, sort of kind of how the Chevy Volt actually really looked like a science experiment. And then, Chevy, and now we see Nissan kind of bringing it back to more of a mainstream car. But what I like about the looks about the Leaf is it still looks special. To me, this looks like sort of like a luxury small hatch, almost like something you might see out of Nissan's alliance partner, Renault.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It definitely is going to be a better performer. It's rated at 147 horsepower,
right,
236 pound-feet of torque, and it's got about 150-mile range.
Mm-hmm. All good things. Of course, if you want to know more details about the Leaf, you got to check this out on our website. Lots of great coverage from our editor of Autoblog Green, John Belt Snyder. He went to Japan. He was gone for a whole week. He drove the car, so he's got his first drive. All that good stuff is up. Be sure to check that out. Of course, check out the replay of our live stream that we did earlier this week. Really cool stuff. You could just watch what the car was like to be revealed. So that was cool.
Now, something I'm curious, what do you think? Do you think 150 miles is enough?
So I think it is, actually. What's cool about this is they're pricing this below the Model S, below the Model 3, below the Chevy Bolt. So the price that they did confirm is $30,875. So that's actually down about $690 from the outgoing model. That's interesting. It's a little bit more of a value play. A lot of different people can get into a Leaf and thus get into an electric car at that price point. And when you realize, hey, the car costs a little bit less money, you could sort of make your peace with the fact that 150 miles is less than what the Tesla range and what the Bolt potentially offer. That being said, I think it's still a decent amount of money. If you're smart and you're really into the Leaf, try and see if you can still get that federal tax credit, which is several $1,000s. It was up to $7,500, I believe. Yeah, and that really takes that price down.
Yeah, as far as I know, it's still $7,500. So you'd be looking at a car that's only like $23,000.
That's a steal, I think, especially for how good this thing looks. And, to your point, Joel, 150 miles, that's 43 more than the old car. And that is way more than most people drive in a typical day. Even if you have a long commute, say you drive 50 miles, which is pretty long, you get to your office, theoretically it has some sort of charging, or so, maybe you make that sort of arrangement, charge it up, drive home, you're totally fine. Even if you can't charge it, well, hey, you've still got probably 50 miles of sort of runway, if you will, to get you home and maybe run an errand or two. So I think this could be the sweet spot of the market, an affordable electric car that looks good and is very affordable. I think this is also what the Bolt is going for. It's from another mainstream car brand, so I'm excited to see how this plays out. It's a really good time if you like electric cars.
Yeah. I personally kind of feel like 150 miles is a little bit low for my needs. I would feel more comfortable with the 230 miles on the Chevy Bolt EV.
You're a Bolt man?
Yeah, I mean, I like the way the Bolt drives, too.
Sure.
But I have to reserve judgment on the Leaf until I can get behind the wheel. But we did see that it looks like Nissan will be releasing a longer range Leaf in the near future, possibly around 220, 225 miles.
I think that could be a cliche, but it could be the difference maker, to use that term, because then you get on that level right in Bolt territory. My guess is it would probably cost Bolt territory.
Yeah.
So that's where you get more of an apples to apples comparison. Have not driven the new Leaf, but having driven the Bolt, was very impressed with that vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of high praise for that. It drives well. It looks a little bit different. It still has kind of that science experiment vibe going on, but I think Nissan's got a formidable hill to climb. The Bolt is tough, and of course, Teslas are out there. They're good-looking vehicles too. They're status symbols. So it's definitely it's an interesting time, like I said, to like electric cars.
For sure.
Cool. I mean, that's the Leaf. Hey, if you have any questions about the Leaf, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook, on Twitter. Leave comments at the bottom of our posts or videos. We'd love to engage with you more about this car. It really is, I think, one of the most important vehicles we'll see heading into 2018. Speaking of 2018, it is the fall. We're getting a preview of a lot of the models that will be coming out. The new season sort of kicks off with a big European auto show. It alternates between Paris and Frankfurt. This year, it's Frankfurt. You're going to Germany. I think you're going to have a great time. I've covered this show many times. It's a lot of walking, but it's also going to be a really big show this year. So you've done some research on this. What's on the menu so far?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a big show. I've been going through and kind of picking up the highlights of what we're going to be seeing. Mercedes is going to be one of the big showers at Frankfurt this year. Kind of their minor reveal will be S-Class Coupe and Cabrio. They've shown the pictures for that. It's gotten a mild refresh. Now uses the 4-liter turbo V8s instead of what they were using previously. But their big stuff, actually a lot of it has to do with electrics and alternative fuels. One of them is the GLC F-Cell, which is a plug-in fuel cell crossover SUV. It'll go about 31 miles on an electric charge and has a total range of 310 miles on hydrogen.
That's interesting. I think it's kind of cool, also interesting to see sort of a return to fuel cells. The infrastructure has never been there really for, in the United States. In Europe, the roads are a little bit tighter. Things are closer together. Maybe it could work over there. I'm really interested to see what they're going to do with this sort of technology.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised to see that they're going to have a fuel cell, just because, like you said, there hasn't been a whole lot of infrastructure development. And as far as car makers interested in it, it's basically been Toyota and Honda and also Hyundai.
Right.
Chevy had their Equinox fuel cell for a while, several years back, but haven't really heard anything about that in a long time.
I believe I drove that car, and it was quite a long time ago. I drove it at the Autobahn Country Club, I think, in Illinois. Totally random thing. It could have been a Pontiac fuel cell. I might be wrong on this. Really going down some rabbit holes. But yeah, to reinforce that, the technology has been sort of stagnant. Automakers have kind of turned away from it, and I think it's cool to see Mercedes spend some money and get back into it. We'll see what they do with it, though.
For sure. And even more interestingly, this fuel cell is developed with Ford.
That's telling.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see if maybe Ford has something down the road, too.
I think Ford is definitely going to look at, a number of ways, for alternative propulsion. So,
other Mercedes-related stuff, 2 EQ concepts. One of them is the EQA, which is going to be kind of a CLA, GLA class size vehicle. We're expecting it to be a little hatchback, similar to the bigger EQ concept they showed earlier. And the other EQ is the Smart Vision EQ, which is a fully autonomous smart concept that they'll be showing. And it's a funky looking little thing.
Cool. I would have thought it would have that's another kind of curious play. I'm surprised Mercedes is, using Frankfurt to show this vehicle. It almost seems more like a CES sort of vehicle. I don't know. It's an interesting play to roll it out in Frankfurt. But the thing about the Frankfurt show is this is the time of the year when car companies, especially European car makers, want to show, hey, we're technology leaders. So that's another reason you start to see some of these sort of curious concepts, if you will, come out. So what else is on the menu? There's got to be something a little bit more fun than all these hybrids and autonomous cars.
Well, there is, and again, it comes from Mercedes. It is the long-awaited AMG Project One hypercar.
About time.
Yeah. We've seen the powertrain for it. It has a 1.6-liter turbocharged V6 that is taken from their F1 cars, and it's plopped into a hybrid hypercar that it will have 1,000 horsepower and go over 217 miles per hour.
I can't wait. This is the kind of sort of numbers that you only see from things like Bugatti or Koenigsegg, and to see a mainstream car maker say, "Hey, we're going to invest in a Halo car and we're going to do this." I think that's great. It's cool. They're finally going to show. Is this a concept or is this the full deal?
This is going to be the production car.
Wow, I can't wait to see this thing. This is going to be fun. I think this is, sometimes we give out awards for the show. I think if we do that this year, this is a strong contender.
Yeah, you could maybe argue that there might be other cars that are more significant per se, or more important to the industry, but you can't. It's hard to argue with a crazy super fast hypercar, and
with an F1 engine and 1,000 horsepower, I think those are your two key arguments.
Mm-hmm. And it is very much a racing engine. It's I remember that it doesn't rev quite as high as the F1 engine. It revs to about 11,000 RPM.
Oh, just 11,000
exactly.
RPM. Okay, that's fine. We can make do.
Yeah, and it's got kind of a race car engine life cycle, too. Mercedes said that it'll need a rebuild at about 31,000 miles.
That's hilarious. Like, here's your car. You're going to buy it. You're going to own it. But, by the way, it's only going to last about 31,000 miles. Mm-hmm. But realistically, how many cars do you think are going to hit 31K on the odometer? I mean, probably not all that many.
This thing could go 50 years without ever reaching that rebuild point.
Right. So lots of good stuff from Mercedes. Let's couple more highlights. What else were we looking forward to besides the wheat beer and the knockwurst?
Yeah, Mini has a couple interesting things. They also have an electric concept, and they also have a John Cooper Works GP concept coming up.
That's going to be fun.
Yeah. Oddly, neither of them have any performance specs yet, so that's something that we'll be looking for when we get to the show. The GP looks pretty crazy. Like previous GP models, it's got a big rear wing. It doesn't have a back seat. It's got chassis bracing in the back. And this one has these ridiculous fender flares that run up the whole length of the fenders.
Wow. It's, Mini has done some really interesting concepts over the years. And sometimes it's like those concepts translate directly to production, which I think is great. It's sometimes you never hear of these things again. So we'll see what happens here. I mean, does anybody remember the Mini Rocket Man concept? Like, what happened to that thing?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would like to see this thing come to life. It sounds really cool. And I like what Mini does. I hope they sort of double down on this, performance, confidence that they're bringing to the show.
Yeah, and I think there's a solid chance that we'll see a production Mini GP, just because we've had one for each of the previous generations of modern Mini, and this one doesn't look too different aside from the wild bodywork. And I mean, I don't know, it just seems like something that they've done it before. Why not again?
I think you're right. If I were a betting man, I think this one sounds like it's a pretty safe bet to reach production. One more car.
All right, one more. Well, I'd say we should probably talk about Honda's EV and hybrid stuff.
Good choice. A couple cars here, right?
Yeah, technically. But we don't know a lot about them, so we can squeeze them in real quick.
We'll count them as one.
Yeah. So one of them is Honda has a mystery EV concept, and about all we know is that it's designed for Europe, and that's about it. They just released a teaser that shows a charging progress bar.
Okay, so we know it's an electric car that needs to be charged.
Yep.
Great.
And it's for Europe, so probably kind of a small, practical little hatchback maybe.
Okay, kind of like a city runabout sort of thing.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, that's, you got to come back to us next week. We'll have all the details on this. I'm intrigued by this one.
And the other thing from Honda is they've got a CR-V hybrid that they're going to be showing. And they showed a CRV hybrid at a Chinese auto show earlier this year, but with no details. Looks like this will probably be the same thing, and we're hoping that this will actually have the specs and things on it.
Have we heard anything about will this come to the United States?
They haven't said anything officially as far as I know, but it would be insane if they didn't.
I agree. I mean, this is literally what American buyers would like.
Mhm.
It's a really good crossover. I think it looks great, drives great. One of their best products. You add the hybrid to it, and you've got that strong Honda name. I think you could sell a lot of these things. Especially if gas prices go back up. Suddenly you've got this crossover that's also a hybrid. If they price it right, that's a really attractive proposition, especially to families, people who need to put, the golden retriever in the back. But hey, a hybrid works too. This is another sort of could be a big deal for Honda.
Yeah, and actually, I did just remember when Honda was talking about their hybrid and electric strategy in the future. They did say for sure that they are going to bring a hybrid light truck to the U.S. They didn't say specifically what model, but safe bet it's a CRV.
That sounds like a pretty safe bet. And another safe bet, we got to transition out from the news section. If you guys have any questions about, our quick sort of blitz through the cosmos, always be sure to reach out to us on social platforms. Happy to follow up if you have questions about some of this stuff, because we get through it quickly. Reach out to us. Let us know what you think. But it was a cool week last week. We had the Alfa Romeo Giulia in the office. This was in Lusso trim, so it had a lot of cool stuff on it. I was psyched to drive it. I thought it looked great. It had all-wheel drive. It had the engine with 280 horsepower, so it was pretty responsive. But it wasn't like the muscle car Quadrifoglio edition. Inside was beautiful. It was tan, some nice wood pieces. I remember sitting it and thinking, you can really see well out of this car. I was surprised because a lot of cars these days, it's like the blocky pillars are in front of you. You've got the big hood, and it was just, this really was a driver's car.
Yeah, I was very excited to drive this because, well, I haven't had an Alpha experience until now. This is
Okay.
my first Alpha.
All right.
And I, as you may have seen in our driver's notes, I've been such a huge Alfa Romeo skeptic. I've not understood the mania this company seems to inspire in fans. I don't know if it has something to do with like the Top Gear hosts having said stuff like you can't be a real petrol head until you've owned an Alpha, but I've heard all of this gushing about them, and I've always had a hard time understanding why, and having driven it now, I finally kind of get it. That 280 horsepower engine, it doesn't sound like it's amazing, but I never felt like I needed any more power out of it. It felt like a really good amount, and it is 300 pound-feet of torque. That may have had something to do with
it's a
it
torquey
too.
drive. It feels
Yeah.
good.
The engine sounds pretty good for a turbo four-cylinder. They can sometimes sound kind of anonymous, but this had kind of a little bit of a gargling kind of growl to it. And it handles great. The steering is so quick, and it feels good.
Yeah, it was engaging to drive. Absolutely. I definitely took the long way home the night I was driving it. I pulled right out of our office here. One Autoblog Tower is right off of Woodward. That's a pretty famous road here if you're in Michigan or the Midwest. Took that north a little bit. Took it a little bit through kind of like this pretty spread out suburban kind of road. And yeah, it was fun. I mean, taking the corners a little bit quick, it was cool. You played with the settings a little bit. None of them really made a huge difference to me, but it's nice to have. This one came in at $51,490, which seems about right to me, actually. You get a lot of stuff on it. It's a good-looking car. Wasn't wild about the infotainment. I think I figured it out fairly quickly. It's fairly simple, but this is actually an instance where I think, hey, use the FCA Uconnect, maybe call it something else, make it look a little bit different, but that's a great system. That's bulletproof. That might have been one where Alpha just kind of dips into the family sort of parts bin and goes for it there. Otherwise, I didn't have many complaints. It looks great. This one was subtle. You know, we had that Quadrifoglio one that was bright red, if I recall, really stood out. This one was a little more subtle, and you know, to your point, I see why people are so taken with Alpha. You know, I've always liked them. I've driven a few of them, different generations, different years. I drove a 69 Spider once, got a speeding ticket in it. That was kind of cool. It was wild. I got pulled over, and they were like, do you know how fast you were going? And I'm like, well, the speedometer doesn't work, and it's in kilometers, so no. But I got like a parking ticket for it, so I guess I got off lightly. But there is sort of that romance. You know, maybe you've driven one or two of them. You haven't really lived with one. So it's sort of that, like, the idea of the brand is a little bit different than, like, people who owned some of those cars in the 80s and 90s that were not as good looking. They were not as reliable. Well, they were not reliable. And, you know, I think people are still buying into it. And what's attractive to me about, you know, the Giulia and the Stelvio is these are different than some of the other other vehicles in the segment. You know, they're different than BMWs, they're different than Mercedes and Lexus and Acuras. To me, you've got brands like Alfa, Jaguar, and Cadillac that offer you these like design propositions that are different, they're bolder, some of them are more performance oriented, and it's just sort of like, if hey, you want something that's like sparkly and different, you know, it's cool that these brands are, you know, showing some strength, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm never going to be upset that there's another company out there offering a really good to drive car. The only thing that I still worry about a little bit is whether or not Alpha has really gotten all the reliability kinks worked out. Driving this one, I mean, the switchgear felt kind of chintzy, and I did pick up like one or two creaks while driving, and it only had 4,000 miles on it.
Yeah, that's scary. I kind of experienced some of those things as well. I was wondering, like, am I noticing this because I'm listening for it? Like, oh, it's an Italian car. Maybe you listen a little more closely. But yeah, I mean, that's legitimately, if you're going to spend 51 grand on a car, you know, Mercedes and BMW have, Lexus and Acura, they have stronger and more recent track records of reliability. Do you want to put this kind of money down on a car that, you know, has not been reliably sold in the United States in decades? You know, that's a question.
Yeah. It kind of makes the case that maybe the best way to go about it would be to lease one right off the bat. So that
Fair
way,
point.
if things go badly, you're not committed to it 100%.
Fair point. That's, yeah. It's, you know, it may not be a long-term proposition, but it's a fun car to drive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'd like to get another chance at driving this one. Or ones like it. You know, we had the Quadrifoglio, and that one was pretty severe for my taste. So it seemed like the transmission was a little bit harsh. This model, it just seemed like the powertrain was just a little better integrated, just a little smoother. Obviously, having considerably less power has something to do with it, but it just seemed like a slightly better execution. And I don't normally say I like the car with less power, but I really like the Lusso. So that's a lot on the Alfa Romeo Giulia. Let's briefly touch on the BMW M550i. I know it's a cool car. You like the 5 Series. I spent a weekend in it. Did lots of different things with it. It was, you know, it's fun to have that big V8 under the hood. It sounded good. It, you know, it made a statement. You know, the neighbors were looking at it. They're like, what's going on with this car? You know, it looks just a little bit more special than the regular 5 Series, I think. I think it's good that they have it in their lineup. It's not exactly an M5 per se, but you get a lot of performance out of it.
Well, I mean, that's what I was going to ask. I didn't have a chance to drive this one, but did you feel that it was deserving of having an M badge somewhere on the car, even if it's not officially truly an M car?
Yeah, it's, you know, it's interesting because M is such a loaded letter. When you see it, you're like, oh, wow, it's an M. And, you know, at first, I didn't even make the brain calibration. Like, oh, M550, sweet. No, wait, that's not an M. You know, there was like some mental push-ups there. But 456 horsepower, 480 pound-feet of torque. That's a pretty great output. The inside had some subtle M badging and finishes, things like that. It looked kind of like an M car. You know, to be honest, though, as much as I liked it, it almost didn't feel like an M car. It felt like a really powerful, well put together 5 Series. And I guess if they had called it something different, I would have been like, this car is awesome. When you slap the M badge on there, it's kind of like, oh, wow, that's a lofty expectation to live up to. And brilliant car. I think it probably is the right move to call it an M550. You know, you need to cash in on that sort of brand awareness. But when I look at it truly from like an enthusiast perspective, you know, it's not that close to an M5, at least not how those cars feel and just how you feel when you're driving, when you're waiting to drive the car. And it's a tough level of expectations, that's for sure. But like I said, this is a brilliant car, had a great weekend in it, very practical, put all kinds of things in it. The trunk is pretty big. It's, fun to drive around town. It looks good. Fits, golf clubs, food, dogs, whatever you want. So it's, certainly a big, practical, fast sedan. So lots of good stuff. That's what we're driving. If you're curious about what we're driving, we get a lot of cool things in the fleet. They're in our driver's notes. That's on our site. Those go up on Thursdays and Fridays. We do walk-arounds, live drives. You got to check those out on Facebook and our other video platforms. If you're curious about a car, sometimes we'll get really cool cars that come through the fleet and they sort of just pass through like ships in the night, and we drive them for background, for comparison's sake. But let us know, if there's something you're curious about, we can sort of drop that in, a little vignette about what we're driving. We're going to move things along, though, to the opinion part of the show. I think the whole show is opinion, isn't it? But this is where we just take an opinion, and it's either popular, it's unpopular. In this case, we're going to talk about the notion of auto shows. With Frankfurt upon us, I think it's pretty critical to talk about it. Joel, you've got somewhat of a strong opinion. How do you feel about the relevance of auto shows in the modern automotive world?
Well, as for the relevance of auto shows, I am kind of starting to wonder whether or not they're really, really necessary. Nowadays, so many reveals are done. They're broadcast digitally. You can live stream them. I mean, we've covered live streams here.
The Leaf was just shown.
Exactly. And I mean, we can see the whole reveal from anywhere at any time. We get the information ahead of time frequently, not always. That so often you can just about cover an entire auto show from our office. We could cover most of an auto show just from here without having to send anybody. And so to an extent, it does kind of seem like, gosh, you could save a lot of fuel and a lot of time and a lot of money by just getting all the information to editors wherever they happen to be and not have this whole dog and pony show, Camaro and Mustang show at some official location.
I think that's actually a pretty prevailing opinion right now. Not just among auto journalists, who cares what we think and what we travel, but like car companies, they're reviewing the cars themselves. And when you do that, you own the news cycle. From a media standpoint, it's a really good move if you're going to just try and get people to focus on your car. I mean, it's good from the media standpoint because we get to focus on one car instead of running from one press conference to another, to another, to another. Sometimes they're at the same time.
Sometimes it is a literal run.
It's quite often a literal run. When you get to Frankfurt, you better bring your track spikes. It's a run. So, I mean, in some ways, the day perhaps is past, especially with everything is digital, everything is mobile. You're not going to wait 2 months to read about this in your favorite car magazine because you'll have seen everything probably on your phone, like when you wake up Tuesday morning and you're scrolling through and seeing what the reaction is, to the cars that were revealed. I will take a slightly contradictory position from you, Joel, because at this point, this moment in time, September of 2017, they are still relevant. We're still sending you. Lots of other people are still going. As you just mentioned, there's a ton of cars there. Right now, they're still relevant. 2 years from now, I don't know if I'll be able to say the same thing. I think this is going to be kind of like a slow glide path until, maybe one or two like mid-major auto shows sort of drops off the calendar, and they just go back to be consumer shows. You go to the show, you shop for the cars, you look at the cars. There's still great events for consumers to go and sit, feel, look, and touch on the cars. But from a media standpoint, I think you're going to see next couple of years some of these mid-level shows, dial back a little bit, and then it might, sort of be like maybe 3 or 4 big auto shows a year, and that's it. That's what the media goes to. And ultimately, it probably will only be 1 or 2. It's going to be almost like a Super Bowl at that point. It'll be more like maybe a trade show or a convention. It's going to evolve, absolutely.
Yeah, and I suppose you could make the argument that there is relevance also in being able to go to a specific place, talk to engineers and executives that you may not really have access to at other points in time, or maybe more controlled by PR people, and making sure that that nothing is given away too soon.
Sure.
And sometimes, when you're actually there and you're in the media scrum and you're hearing all the questions and stuff, it may prompt a new idea for you, something to ask about that maybe you wouldn't have thought of just on your own at your computer, staring at the screen,
sure,
picking out your information. And I'll also make the argument that, I at least enjoy big flashy auto shows.
I agree with
whether
you
or not it's
completely.
relevant.
Absolutely. I think, like I said, right now, I think they're still totally relevant. You should think they're relevant too. Come to Autoblog, look at all the reveals, totally relevant. But we're talking, I think, maybe mainly from the media perspective and from the automaker perspective. So forgive us if this is a little insidery, but also this is where people get their first looks at the cars. So I think there is, an intrinsic, value to discuss where these things are going forward. And like you, I love going to auto shows. I think it's great to interview people. It's where you really get the stories, the good stories, stuff that you can't get other places, where, you get up close and personal with the cars.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of getting up close and personal, we got to reach out to one of our readers. It's time for Spend My Money. Joel, you're an ace at one of these. You ready for this?
Yep.
Okay, this is a little bit of a letter here, so I'm going to kind of synthesize it for you. Reader writes to us, currently has a 2015 Lexus IS 350F Sport. Pretty cool. They're at the end of their lease. Daily commute of 50 miles. It's about an hour each way, so that's a good, definitely a commute. I've done commutes like that. But they use their 2010 Versa for that, which is a bit at 130,000 on the odometer. So that one's getting a little long in the tooth as well. Looking for one car to replace both of these for $15,000 or less. So they're crossed up between an MK6 GTI 4-door and a 2015 Mazda 3 2.5 GT hatch with the manual. That sounds pretty good too. Wanted to know if we have other suggestions. I bet you have one or two. Here's some of the criteria. Car has to be a 4-door, performance-oriented, decent miles per gallon, able to apparently carry a baby, have utility, and be easy on their lower back. Thanks for your time and great show. Thank you for writing in. What do you think, Joel?
Well, the two possibilities, the GTI and the Mazda 3, those are pretty spot on. Like, you'd have a hard time going wrong with either one. I would say the GTI would be a little bit more fun. It's got more power. It's got quite a bit more torque, and I think would probably generally feel a little bit more sporty. Not that the 3 isn't fun to drive, but the GTI is very clearly a performance car. The Mazda 3, on the other hand, would definitely get better gas mileage for sure. And it's, well, I think I like the Mazda 3's interior just a little bit better than Volkswagen.
Fair enough,
I don't know,
yeah.
I don't know how you feel on that, Greg.
I mean, I would probably go GTI here, just because I think the Mazda 3 is a fun car to drive for short to medium periods of time, but car I had to live with for a long time, I'd totally do GTI, I think. That would be a lot of fun, I think.
I do have a couple of ideas.
Let's hear them.
And I don't know that they're necessarily better, but they're at least other possibilities that you may not have thought
Better
of.
ideas.
One of them is a car that I consistently forget exists, and I actually remembered it this past weekend because I was talking to a friend of mine that is considering getting a car soon, and that's the Buick Regal GS. And
Wow, yeah, I forgot about that car. And it is a good car. Yeah, good point.
yeah, it looks great, and it's got a peppy engine. It's a turbo 4-cylinder that's like 280 some horsepower, and it is available with a manual transmission. And if you wanted to, you could even get it with all-wheel drive as long as you're okay with an automatic.
That is a really good perceptive option. It's a fun car to drive too. It really is.
Yeah, and you can get them for pretty cheap. The other thing that and of course, kind of a mid-size-ish sedan, so
Yeah,
it's
so
got plenty of space.
Yeah, you could put some stuff in that car.
Mhm.
You get the European sort of chassis tuned because that Regal is essentially an Opel. So
Yeah. My other suggestion would be Subaru Legacy 2.5 GT. Not the current generation, but the previous generation.
good point.
Because that one has basically the WRX turbo 4-cylinder. It's all-wheel drive. It's available with a manual transmission, and the previous generation arguably isn't as good looking, and it's not as popular as like the regular WRX. So there's a better chance you'll find just a nice, clean stock version that hasn't been beat to heck.
It's a good one. I definitely did not think of. I think that could be a strong possibility. Something that perhaps reader you didn't think of. Definitely worth checking out. The Regal GS is like that's straight out of the left field. Honestly, you should just go test drive one of those. It's fun, even if you're like, this isn't my flavor of brandy. Well, hey, that's okay. You got to drive a sporty manual transmission car. Sounds fun to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, that's our recommendation. I'm saying GTI. Joel is offering you several different choices that, in all seriousness, are definitely worth looking into. These are really reasoned options that have lots of good benefits for each one.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Joel.
Yep, no problem.
All right. So that is today's show. Thank you for watching the Autoblog Podcast. Be sure to reach out to us on Twitter, on Facebook. We want to hear from you. We want to engage with you. On the podcast, this is something that we feel like is a great way to communicate with you, the Autoblog user and enthusiast. So thanks for being here, Joel. Always a pleasure. Safe travels to Frankfurt.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And I'm Greg Migliore. Thanks for watching and listening.